I'm going to talk about the question intent taxonomy we developed as part of the question answering research we have been doing at RMIT. Our research had three objectives. First, we wanted to develop a multifaceted question taxonomy reflecting recent trends in questions asked in web search engines. As the second objective, we wanted to develop a formal editorial study procedure for taxonomy creation, and in the paper we also share our experience regarding caveats and pitfalls encountered during the execution of this procedure. Finally, based on the developed intent taxonomy, we provide a characterization of questions asked in modern-day web search engines. When developing a new taxonomy, the first question that comes to mind is whether there are any issues with the existing taxonomies and if we really need a new taxonomy. In our case, we wanted to have a new intent taxonomy because of three reasons. First, old intent taxonomies tend to suffer from a coverage issue because they may not be able to classify new query types that appear as web search engines evolve and provide new functionality to users. That is, web search taxonomies may become stale in time. Second, in our case, the existing web search taxonomies focus on general search queries. Our research specifically targets question-like web search queries, which are becoming more common. Third, query taxonomies usually lead to skewed intent distributions. That is, bulk of the queries are placed in very few intent categories. Such skewed distributions are not preferable when training query classification models. The taxonomy we designed results in relatively more reasonable skewness in intent distribution, as we will see later. We developed our taxonomy through an editorial study conducted with 5 participants. All of the participants in the study acted as assessors and performed labeling, and one of them also acted as the coordinator of the study. As the question sample, we used 1000 randomly sampled queries from the MS Marco dataset, which contains question-like queries editorially selected from Microsoft Bing query logs. The editorial study procedure we proposed and followed in this work involves 9 consecutive phases, which I will talk about in the following slides. We have many phases because the procedure involves multiple feedback, discussion, revision, and labeling steps. By iterating on the guidelines and the assigned labels and refining them as the need arises, we aim to increase the agreement between the assessors. As we will see later in our results, this kind of gradual refinement of labels lead to increased assessor agreement, and as a result of increased agreement, we observe fewer tight, undecided cases, which means that we can assign a label to a larger fraction of questions. The first phase of the editorial study procedure we followed is bootstrapping, which aims to start the labeling process by providing a common ground to all assessors. In this phase, the coordinator samples a small number of questions to be labeled, then iterates over the sampled questions, trying to identify a set of suitable facets for the taxonomy as well as some suitable categories for each identified facet, and finally provides a brief description of every facet and category along with a small number of representative questions. At the end of this phase, a draft taxonomy and draft guidelines are prepared and passed to the assessors together with a small sample of questions. In the second phase, based on the draft documents they received from the coordinator, the assessors individually perform a small-scale labeling study on the sampled questions. In the third phase, the coordinator meets with the assessors and receives feedback on challenges they encountered during the labeling of the small question sample. This may include feedback about issues with the draft taxonomy, unclear or ambiguous statements in the guidelines, questions that cannot be labeled, and the expected time overhead of the study. In the fourth phase, based on the assessor's feedback, the coordinator revises the taxonomy as well as the guidelines and provides the assessors a larger set of questions for labeling. In our case, after the revision phase, we obtained a final intent taxonomy which contains 14 different categories. These are advice, attribute, calculation, description, entity, language, list, location, opinion, process, quantity, reason, resource, temporal, verification, and whether. You may refer to the paper for a description of these intent categories. Beside the question intent, we obtain several other facets. Two of these are the type of the entity mentioned in the question and the answer. Here, as labels, we use an extended version of the entity types provided in the Stanford NLP library. The other two facets are the question word and the optimal granularity of the answer, where the answer granularity can take one of the 5 possible values: phrase, list, sentence, passage, or document. In phase 5, each assessor independently labels the provided questions based on the revised taxonomy and guidelines. This phase is where the bulk of the work happens. In the 6th phase, the coordinator gathers the labels from all assessors and performs an agreement analysis, where the goal is to identify the cases where a particular assessor diverges significantly from the rest of the assessors in their assessment. The analysis can be automated by scripts that extract recurring patterns in labels, revealing misinterpretation of guidelines or other potentially erroneous labeling. Finally, the coordinator provides each assessor with some individual feedback, giving an abstract view of cases where they are frequently in disagreement with the remaining assessors and potential reasons which may have led to disagreement. In the 7th phase, assessors reconsider their labels based on the feedback provided by the coordinator in the previous phase. Although the assessors are expected to review their labels at this stage, they are not obliged to change them if they continue to think that their interpretation is correct. In phase 8, provisional labels are assigned to questions by majority voting. All assessors get together and try to reach agreement on the labels of questions where majority voting does not lead to an outcome. The goal is to resolve all ties and assign a single label to every facet of each question. However, some ties may still remain unresolved, as the assessors are again not obliged to change their labels in this phase. In the last phase, the coordinator gathers the final labels of the assessors and aggregates them by assigning a single label to every facet of each question if majority voting leads to a unique label. Otherwise, no label can be assigned. In this table, we see the change in Assessor Agreement at 3 different phases of the editorial study for different facets. The 4th column in the table shows the agreement for the question intent facet. We see that after basic labeling, the agreement stands around 66%. After the relabeling and tie-breaking phases, the agreement increases to 70 and 72% respectively. So there is some reasonable improvement here. Due to the time constraint, I will not go over the other facets, but we can say that the behavior is similar, as we see some increase in assessor agreement as the editorial study proceeds. In this table, we observe the decrease in the tied cases as a result of the increase in assessor agreement. More specifically, in the 5th column of the table, we see the percentage of tied cases for the question intent facet at different phases of the study. After phase 5, that is, without any refinement of labels, the percentage of tied cases is about 11%. After the relabeling and tie-breaking phases, the percentage of tied cases drops to 9.6% and 3.7% respectively. This means that at the end of the study, about 96% of the questions can be assigned to an intent category. Now, let's have a look at the distribution of labels for the proposed taxonomy and the common use taxonomy of Rose and Levinson. Here, we see that the proposed taxonomy leads to less skewed distribution than Rose and Levinson's taxonomy, as in Rose and Levinson's taxonomy, great majority of questions fall into a single intent category. About 82% falls into the directed closed category. In our case, description, quantity, and entity categories are the most popular intent types. More than half of the labeled questions are assigned to these categories. We also observe a tangible number of calculation and language questions, but very few temporal and location questions. This is probably because more and more people are starting to use search engines as tools for calculation and conversion, or as dictionaries, but switching to suitable mobile applications for spatial or temporal questions. Here we see the label distributions for the remaining facets. According to the first table, about half of the questions mention at least one entity in the query string. Audiovisual entities, like songs and movies, are the most common entity type, about 8% of the labeled questions. According to the second table, A bit more than half of the questions expect an entity in their answer. The most expected entity type is person, followed by duration and money. According to the third table, as expected, what questions are the most common? And we see very few when, where, and why questions in our sample. Finally, in the last table, we see that almost all questions can be answered properly without retrieving an entire document, and about half of the questions can be optimally answered by a simple phrase. This is a summary of our findings. First, despite being more fine-grained, the proposed taxonomy leads to a less skewed distribution as well as higher editorial agreement compared to the popular query intent taxonomy of Rose and Levinson. Second, the multi-phase procedure we followed in the editorial study results in higher assessor agreement as the number of phases increases, with relatively little overhead for assessors. Third, we point at the emergence of certain question intent categories which did not receive much research attention previously, like questions with calculation conversion intent. Finally, confirming previous research, we find that retrieving entire web documents to answer question-like queries is somewhat redundant, as the information need of almost all questions can be satisfied with a single passage or a shorter piece of text. For further detail and results, you may refer to the paper. Thanks for watching.